All right. Hello and welcome everyone to another Chat and Learn, the first Chat and Learn of 2021. I really appreciate everyone for joining this call. I know that there are a lot of crazy things going on in the world and you could be anywhere else virtually or physically, but you're deciding to spend the next hour with us. With that said, I see you, I appreciate you. I just want to say thank you for taking the time out to be present with us. And I just want to hop into some quick housekeeping rules so that folks feel comfortable and confident in this next hour. And I see that folks are writing in the chat box where they're calling from and a little bit about themselves. I'm going to give you all a shout out in just a second. I've turned everyone on mute upon entrance just to avoid background noise, but I can't stress enough, and I'm going to sound like a broken record throughout this call. Would love for you to hop off of mute whenever you have something to share. If it's a dream that you had last night, or if something comes to mind in the moment, don't hesitate, come off mute, speak your mind, share your voice. We want to give you this platform to be as authentic as you can and to use this hour to your benefit. So hop off mute whenever you feel called to do so. Write in the chat box whenever you feel called to do so as well. If you want to be kept anonymous, if you have any sensitive information, find me in the chat box under Mariella Marie. You can write to me privately and I will flag you anonymously to our guest speaker and she will approach your comment or your reflection and keep you anonymous. So I know that we're going to be talking about some really sensitive topics. We need work. The world is on fire. What the heck? What's going on? I know our guest speaker is going to dive into this in a few, but again, if anyone wants to, be kept anonymous, feel free to find me in the chat box and I'll keep you private. With that said, if you do hop off of mute, you will be featured in our live recording. And then I know that we live in a world where everyone is multitasking. If you join previous chats, you've heard my spiel. Feel free to stop the multitasking spirit right now and be present with us so that you can share your voice. You can hop off mute right in the chat box, and then you can rewatch this video on Power to Fly a little later, and then you can take notes vigorously there. The last thing that I'll say is that we'd love for you to follow us on socials and subscribe to our YouTube channel so you can keep up with all the great chats we've got stored up this next year, which I can't believe it's already 2021, but I know that our guest speaker is going to dive right into some of her predictions, some of her hopes and dreams, and a lot of her tips and tricks that she is, going to reveal to us in this next hour so that everyone can feel comfortable and confident in this next year as we're job searching. So Diana, I'm going to pass the mic to you. Let us know a little bit about yourself, how you came to know about Power to Fly, and what you're excited to share with us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. So Power to Fly came on my radar through LinkedIn, and I asked Catherine if she would be willing to be a guest on my podcast. The Job Talk Weekly podcast provides job search advice, career advice, and it drops once a week. And I've been doing career consulting, on and off for a long time now, whether it be in Chicago in my early days in human resources or here in Southern California. So I'm really all about job fulfillment. I'm very lucky that early on in my career, I made a switch from a really stuffy corporate environment into nonprofits and human resources work. And I've been really fortunate that I was able to find that. But I only found it because of some assistance that I had along the way, some other people guiding me. And so that is what has motivated me to provide that type of service myself. So I'm really excited to be here today and see how I can help everyone get their new year off to a good start.
Great. Thank you for that, Diana. And I will just start by saying you all have submitted some great questions offline. We're going to use this hour to walk through your questions one by one, step by step, starting with this first. Actually, before we jump into the questions, we're going to jump into some mindset tools that Diana wants to talk about, and then we're going to roll into your questions. But if you see your question come on the screen, feel free to hop off mute or write in the chat box. Even if it wasn't your question, we'd love to hear from you. If you've got tips and tricks or a dream last night that came to you, you want to share that with us, feel free to do so. I see a lot of folks have turned their cameras on. Thank you so much for doing that. We believe in visibility. We really feel that when more women and more diverse folks can see themselves, they will see that, we're all going through the same things. We have a lot more in common than we think. So I really appreciate you all for turning your cameras on. I'm going to pass the mic back to you, Diana. Let us know a little bit about this slide that you want to present to us today.
Oh, terrific. Because I think so much of what we accomplish in our job search happens in our head, right? So what we want to do is talk about how you approach your job search, not just what you do. And we'll talk a little bit later about the different steps that you take to be really strategic, to make sure that you're getting the best return on your efforts. Therefore, you feel good about your efforts. But let's start by staying positive and reminding yourself that in a job search, you can only control what you do. You can only control the resume you put out, the networking you do, the phone calls you make. You can't can't control the person on the other side. You can't control what type of day that interviewer had, or you can't control what the company is facing and why they make their decisions. And I know that's really tough because you think it's really personal. This is my life and I'm trying to get employed here. And how can I not take rejection personally? You just have to remember that there are two sides of it. So if you focus on you, then that puts a little bit of the pressure off on trying to solve the entire puzzle. You are your piece of the puzzle, and there's other parts of life that fit into that. One of the ways that I have found to help me handle that stress is meditation. 5 minutes in the morning, maybe 5 minutes at night if you're lucky. Anytime you can break away and just breathe for 5 minutes helps you just handle all the stresses, all the anxiety, all the pressures of all the emails that are coming in. And similarly, you want to look at your language. You want to stick with really positive affirmations. Maybe you are that person who looks in the mirror every morning and gives yourself 5 affirmations. Maybe that's not your thing. So that's okay. So as we talk through these different tips throughout the next hour, use what works for you. But using really positive language, don't get stuck in, oh, I'm never going to get a job. Just say, well, that one didn't come through. So now I'm on to the next one. Constantly pivoting to the next thing, constantly pivoting to something really positive. And one of the ways that I do enjoy doing this is through visualization. And I wanted to highlight visualization too, because the last episode of our podcast in December, before the end of the year, was a terrific coach in New Zealand. And she gave us all these free resources. It's on the episodes page of our podcast. And she gave us some tips and tools. She is at a group called The Daily Positive. That's a great way to get your day started. And she has a lot of resources for people, but visualization can be a way to really focus your mind on the positive outcomes that you want. Even if you're not quite sure exactly what it is, then you can just think, okay, I know I'm going to have a great job by the summer. I know I'm going to have a great new promotion by the spring, whatever that is for you, just constantly staying in that positive frame of mind. And one of the ways that you can also do this is through something called morning pages. I don't know if any of you have read Julia Cameron's book, Artist's Way. Yes. And if she gave us anything, she gave us morning pages. 3 pages in the morning, longhand, by the way, writing them out, and really just whatever's on your mind. I mean, sometimes you're just getting something off your chest. Sometimes you are trying to find your inspiration. And if you don't know where to start with your morning pages, one thing that you could do is list some acknowledgements and some gratitudes. So acknowledge yourself for 5 things that day. And it can be as big as I put myself through grad school, or it can be as simple as I got through the day without yelling at my children. And then same thing with the gratitudes. I mean, there is a lot going on in the world, Mariella, as you say, and it's a really crazy time. But the fact that we have some time, we have the resources to be on a 1-hour webinar shows that we do have something to be grateful for. So if you're starting from a place of gratitude and you acknowledge where you're headed, that will help get you through the tough days. And that's what focus on the end game means. It's like when you're running a marathon, don't think about mile 5, 6, 7, just think about the finish line. And through all these little tools, whether it's meditation or writing, you keep thinking about where you're going to be. And it just helps get you over those hurdles.
Absolutely. And we've got someone writing in the chat, what was the name of the book again? And I'm a huge fan of The Artist's Way. I'm a huge fan of morning pages. It's something that I've cracked open at various stages in my life. And I foresee that I will continue to do it just because it is such a great tool. So Julia, to answer your question, it's called The Artist's Way. And it's by Julia Cameron. Is that correct? That's the author's name, correct?
Yes, right. Yes.
Perfect. And if you want to share a little bit more, Diana, about, I'd love to also hear about why this is one of your pillars of, how to keep your mindset on, how to wake up in the morning, and also to share with our live callers.
Yeah, I think the morning pages for me is just a way to give myself time to myself. And I don't know about some of the other women and people on today's call, but, I have 2 kids, I have 2 dogs, I have a busy career life. By committing to morning pages, I am committing myself 10 to 15 minutes to me, and whatever that is that day. And sometimes it's a little less, sometimes it's a little more, which is funny, but it's sort of that dialogue that you don't always have with other people. So that's why I like it. And honestly, I've been doing it on and off for years. So I've paid attention to the fact that it's something that if I stick with it and I really rely on it, it's working for me.
Absolutely. So for those folks who might be looking at you like, I'm not a writer and I'm not an artist, what would you tell this person?
Okay. So I will call out my husband. My husband does not have time for meditation or visualization or any of this stuff, but he gets on his bike. He's a cyclist and he will go for 2 hours every other day. That is his meditation. That is his way of getting out of the day-to-day life. So I'm glad you asked that question because I wanted to remind folks, find what works for you. And, when we think about meditation, so many times we think of, the yogi on the hill in the pose and the mat and the incense, and you don't need any of that stuff. Just stop for a minute, take your dog for a walk. For some people, it's church. And I know it's hard to go to church right now, but just sitting with yourself in some quiet or whatever type of space brings you peace, I would say that's what meditation is.
And leave your phone when you take your dog for a walk. Leave your phone at home, bury it under a
So
computer,
far.
under
Yes.
the computer, under the pillows.
Yes, absolutely.
All right, so I just want to shout out where we're calling from in the world so that you can keep this in mind, Diana. And thank you all for writing us the chat box. So I'm calling from Argentina and Patagonia. Diana is calling from Southern California. We've got Argentina calling, Buenos Aires. We've got Seattle, Washington, New York, Chicago again, Seattle, Washington, Colorado, Virginia, South Dakota, New Mexico, Austin, Texas, Virginia, Palo Alto, California, Manhattan, New York, Los Angeles, New York, Boston, Barcelona, Minnesota, Pasadena. Awesome. So we've got folks calling from all over. Minneapolis. Great. So keep it going. I'll give you all a shout out in just a minute as well if you're just writing in the chat box. Keep it going. We'd love to hear from you. And Diana, let's start with this first question here. So
Yeah.
how do I keep my hopes up after months of resultless search? What should I change?
Well, one thing I want to acknowledge is whoever wrote this obviously understands that something is not going right. So I think you need to pay attention to what that is. Is it at the beginning of the process that you're sending your resume out, and you're applying for jobs and you're not getting any type of response? Or is it that you're getting called, you're having some phone interviews, but then it's not moving forward? So try and pinpoint where along the process you're getting stuck. And then make sure that you have some outside input. Can you have someone help you with an interview? Can you have someone take a look at your resume? And when we get resume advice, sometimes there's professional advice, or sometimes it's just giving it to a friend. Give it to a critical friend. Don't always give it to your mom or someone who's going to be really nice. Give it to that friend who, is always the person asking for something at the restaurant, like sending it back or asking for extra guacamole. Give it to that person who's going to be critical and say, well, I'm not sure what this means here. So you want to try and find out what the problem is and just try something. I mean, that's the beauty of the digital age. If your resume isn't working, then change it. And you can do that constantly. And I did want to point out one of the questions that came in a little later, I think before the presentation was final. Someone said, how do you keep up at this when it can be tedious and boring? Now, I get it that a lot of this work is repetitive because you're filling up same information, you're sending in all these resumes, but just pay attention to yourself, because if it is so tedious and so boring, make sure that you're on the right track. You want to have a little bit of buzz, you want to have a little bit of excitement for this process. You want to be finding jobs and companies that are of interest to you. And if there's no excitement, there's no buzz for 3 months, then maybe you need to take a step back and really reevaluate what you're shooting for. And are you really aligned with what you're trying to achieve?
And with that said, I know that you have taken a career pivot. I mean, you mentioned in your introduction that you came from corporate, and now that you're doing this beautiful work that you're doing now. And we'd love for you to also mention, how we can find you and connect with you offline when we're finished with this chat. But how can you, in the case that someone is, feeling bored or not feeling inspired through their job search, where's the fine line between, maybe I need to career pivot, or maybe I need to, just change some wording on my resume?
Yeah, I mean, I think some of it has to do with, what's the response that you're getting? And this is where your gut can really tell you. And that's where it's always helpful to talk to other people. It was when I was getting this terrific job offer when I was living in Chicago from another company in Michigan, and it was going to be this great new opportunity. I was going to get a car and I was going to move, and it just didn't sit with me. And it took a friend to show me that, to question that. And I think that's what sometimes our friends can do. They can help reflect what we can't see. So I think it's really important, and we'll talk about this during the network and during your support crew. finding the people who can help guide you along the way, because you're going to have bad days when you want to throw it in, you want to throw in the towel, and it's not all about that. You just had one bad day. So I would constantly stay in touch to what's happening in your gut. Are you miserable every day with this process, or did you just have one bad day? So look at it over time.
And I love that you're bringing the person back to themselves. I love that. If I could say that a common denominator over the years of hosting these chats, and I love that, beautiful minds as beautiful women as yourself are saying, come back to yourself, listen to your intuition, come back to your gut. Don't go looking for the answers outside of yourself. Come back to yourself and decide, like, is this filling me up? Is this making me feel fulfilled? Or do I need to, have some quiet time to maybe do some journaling, maybe reflect a little more, seek my tribe. I know we're going to get into this a little later, but make sure that I'm connecting with the right folks that are challenging me and showing me, the way that will lead me to feeling more fulfilled. So thank you for highlighting that, Diana.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And one thing that I was on the other slide, I don't think we got too much into, I do want to mention self-care, because a couple of people had asked about self-care. And I do want to say that self-care is not an indulgence. It is an investment in you in this process. I have my own rewards and self-care, and most of them have to do with Tina Fey, watching reruns of 30 Rock or watching my favorite movies. Escaping the current situation, whether it's the pandemic or your job search, is great when you read fiction, read a murder mystery, or get into a long series like Game of Thrones, something that pulls you away. Get physical. We touched on that a little bit, similar to what my husband does with the bike. But even if it's cold outside, YouTube has plenty of resources for you to dance around the house, to do yoga, to do stretching in the house. And then planning ahead is something that we've taken in this house. I'm planning my birthday 2021. I'm planning Christmas of 21. We are already mapping out how we're going to fly next year. So those things to take care of yourself help put you in that space. And, you talked about fulfillment, Mariella. I mean, that's really what it's about. You've got to slow down so that you have the time to see what the right opportunity is for you. Otherwise, you're going to be here in 2 more years.
Absolutely. And speaking of self-care, I love this question as well. So if this is your question that you see on the screen, feel free to hop off mute. Or if you want to chime in, this wasn't your question, feel free to write in the chat box or hop off mute. I love that this ties into what you were speaking about with self-care, Diana. So I feel so vulnerable while attending interviews. How can I protect my mental health and energy during this process?
Yeah. So some of the tips, actually, we could have woven them in here too, will help you. But one of the things that I want to remind people is that interviewing is a two-way street. It's not just you selling yourself to get this job. That company should be selling themselves to you. I think of a lot of times when I've had a candidate come in my office, and after the first 5 or 10 minutes, I know, I'm like, okay, I need to turn the tables here, and I need to start telling them what a great place this is, what a great manager we are, how many great opportunities there are for them. That's what you're shooting for. You're shooting for just the one job.
Yes, this is James.
At that one company. Can I keep going? Okay, there we go. And that's the part about the interview process that leaves us vulnerable, for sure. So practice your interview with someone, practice by yourself, practice in the interview, but really think through the fact that you can only control what you can control, what you can do, but it is a two-way street. And if that company isn't trying to sell themselves to you a little bit, then maybe that's not the right fit for you.
Absolutely. And I remember, I guess it must have been about 2 years ago now, as I started to host some of these chats where folks are, asking about, these interview processes and how to make sure you're putting your best face on and seeing it really as a partnership. It's like, it's like a relationship. You don't want to go into a relationship not knowing anything about the other person or, thinking that you only know the superficial part of the person. You really want to see this as, okay, I'm bringing this to the table. What are you bringing to the table? Does it serve me or does it not serve me? And really seeing it as a partnership and starting from the interview process. I think that's a brilliant way to go into the process. I'd love for you to speak a little bit more about that, like how to align, with certain companies or organizations, or maybe it's not the right fit for you and you need to, put some more energy into starting your own projects.
Mm-hmm. Actually, a friend told me once, and this was great advice. She said, how they treat you during the interview process is the best they're ever going to treat you. So if they say something like, well, the company's got some financial headwinds, they're on the verge of bankruptcy. Okay. If they tell you that, oh, we work some extra hours, that could mean that they work 12 or 14 hours a day. So in that interview process, you really do have to glean a lot of questions, again, behavioral questions to get a sense for what it's like there. But that is really the dating period, because then what happens is even after the second or third interview, the snowball has gone and it is moving, and it is moving fast. You're getting caught up, you're getting excited, they're getting excited about you. You're probably already halfway there, more than halfway there. So you really got to make sure that you are paying attention to every little thing throughout the process, and really try as hard as you can to find someone who either works there now or just left. That is actually ideal. If you're interviewing with Wells Fargo and you know someone who left last year, or maybe a friend's spouse left, talk to that person and get the really honest feedback, because the interviewer is going to tell you all the great things about the company. They're not going to tell you about the skeletons in the closet. Only other people can really tell you what it's really like to work there. And that's why, again, during networking, that's why those connections are going to be so important to get the real deal.
Absolutely, absolutely. So we've got a private question here that I'd like to flag to you, Diana. So how can I keep up my spirits when I feel like I have to keep my job search secret from so many people? It's so difficult to
Yeah.
search and tap into my networks when I can't speak openly without worrying about word getting back to my employer.
Yeah, that is a really tough one. And I think that's a good point. I think when you're networking, it's okay to say it's confidential. You just leave it at that. And you do have to be choosy. You do have to pick the right people. Obviously, people maybe where you used to work, the last company before, should be safe. It's sometimes possible that people that you do work with, you're that close to that you can share. But be careful, because the minute you share, it's out there. And let's say you share with one of your fellow managers that you're looking, but then for whatever reason you decide to stay, that person has that information and they always will remember that you were on the verge of leaving. So it's really important in your network to find 2 or 3 work friends that aren't in that immediate circle that you can talk to, because we all come home after a long day at work, or we pivot from one room to another now from remote work, right? And let's say you have a crazy day, and sometimes we want to talk to our partners, but they don't always get it because they're not inside. And that's why we talk to our coworkers so much. We're like, oh my gosh, do you believe that meeting? Do you believe what they said? You do have to find, maybe even if it's just 1 or 2 people, but there's nothing wrong with saying my search is confidential, and then just make sure that you know who those people are. And I've been in that. I mean, I remember when I was interviewing for my last job that like my boss was married to the boss over here, or the chairman or something. There was some connection where I had to be really cautious, and I had to tell the people when I was interviewing, I actually had to just bring it to their attention, just make sure that that these 2 people work together in another level. And it worked out, and people will respect that.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Diana. And so we've got a public message here from Amy, and we've already got some comments based on this tidbit that you've added. Thank you so much, Amy. I'm going to flag this to you, Diana. A question someone told me to ask in interviews is, can you tell me about the most successful person you ever hired and what exactly they did to be successful? That way you can see what is deemed success, extra hours or working as a team, et cetera. I'd love to hear your feedback on this.
Yeah. Well, a common answer in my field, though, is it depends. It depends on what success is for that particular person. You might have a terrific an administrative assistant who reorganized the schedules and reorganized the office, and you could not have succeeded without her. So that could be success. I would just think through, what do you think success would mean in the context of that job for which you're interviewing? And just make it real. And it doesn't have to be fancy. It doesn't have to be, oh, we increased sales by 500%. That's a success on paper by numbers. But if you did it on the backs of other people, then it's not a success. So I would pull in whatever human elements you can to show that's where you are, and maybe sort of show your EQ, the emotional intelligence that we talk about a lot too.
Absolutely. I love speaking about emotional intelligence. And I was just going to say, to piggyback on what you were saying, if the idea of success means, you have, you've hurt yourself physically, your body is reacting, or your mental, your state of mind has been fragmented, that is, for me, that's not successful. And I know that some people function on a different, I think that success is very personal, actually. I'd love for you to speak about success because you did speak about the importance of language. I love speaking about the importance of emotional intelligence. And I feel like this big concept of success is wrapped up in emotional intelligence, wellness, mental health, obviously, being successful in your organization. But, can you give us some of your reflections on that and how we can be mindful of success?
Yeah, because we're going to talk about identity today too. And one of the cautions I have is not to be so wrapped up in your work that if something happens and that job goes away, then you're devastated. Right. So that's where some of the journaling, that's where some of the quiet time defines for you success. I mean, there was one time when I left a pretty big organization to go work for a small, scrappy organization. And I remember a friend saying, "Where's the glamour in that?" Because I used to work for a glamorous organization in her eyes. But it wasn't about that. I liked the challenge. So for me, success was about building something, taking something small, making it bigger, or taking something that was growing and making it better and more effective. So I have had my own definition of success that really doesn't match anyone else's. And I've finally come to grips with that. I think when I was 25, I would have had a much different expectation of what my career would have been. I've never had a 5-year plan that actually worked out the way it would have, 5 years before. I've just kind of gone with, okay, this is where I think I want to be for the next 5 years and go at it that way. So I've made changes. I've had titles that weren't as fancy as the ones that I had 2 jobs ago, but it's about more than that. So that's where we can get caught up. And when the job search, when we get caught up in titles, big companies, I have to work for Goldman Sachs. Do you? Do you really? So I think you just have to figure out what satisfies you, but know that that can change. What you're feeling at 25 is definitely going to be different than what you're feeling at 55, and just be okay with that.
Absolutely. And actually, I would love to hear from some of our live callers. How would you define success? Go ahead and write that in the chat box. What does success mean for you? And I'll flag that to our guest speaker. There's no incorrect answer. So please feel free to go wild with the answer, be as, Webster dictionary as you want as well. I'd love to just hear what you all think about that. As these days, I'm rethinking everything. I don't trust anyone. I'm trying to go back to myself and go to my intuition and be like, what do I believe? What are my beliefs? How do I define, these big concepts such as success and productivity and all these things? And how can I really bring my full self to whatever I'm doing without experiencing burnout, imposter syndrome, like these huge, demons that are really clouding up the workspace these days. So I'd love to hear from you all. What is your definition of success? And in the meantime, Diana, I'm going to flag a private message here that I have. Is it acceptable to ask your potential employer for references who currently work at the company before you accept a job offer?
Okay, good question. And again, it really depends. If you are close with someone and you can pull that person aside and say, look, I'm about to get a job offer. They just need these 2 or 3 references as a formality, because I do know some companies definitely want someone who works with you right now. You're going to have to find that person, or you might have to be really honest with either your manager or the HR director at your company, but just make sure that you are far enough along in that process. And maybe that's a conversation with that potential new employer and say, I'm happy to get references. I know they'll be great, but just so you know, then that will flag me. They're not aware. My search was confidential. So I just want to, remind you of that creates a whole nother situation for me. And then you can get a little bit more assurance from them. I've been lucky that a lot of the references that I've brought have been perhaps supervisors from my last company. Staying in contact with anyone that you worked for is always, always key, and being able to have a variety of people. I have had people say, you know what, no one at my company knows, and it's a really tricky time right now, and can I give you other references? They might say, oh, okay. So you could just also ask. You could just say, I'd love to give you this person that she just left the company last year, but she can still give you a really accurate current reference on me. And that could be okay too.
Beautiful. Thank you for answering that question, Diana.
Okay.
All right, so I'm going to flag some of your definitions of success. So we've got Andrea writes, a good work-life balance and feeling content. Jen writes, a role where I can continue learning, growing, and making systems better in a way that helps others. Julia writes that I've contributed to make the organization or individuals better. Carrie writes, success, the ability to the ability to contribute to a larger mission and find professional growth while also being able to find professional growth outside of my job. Colleen writes, work-life balance. As I've gotten older, working excessive hours like a badge of honor no longer appeals to me. Anne writes, using my unique skills to make a positive impact. I've got a direct message here. Success is fulfillment at work, clear direction and support from management, and an employer who appreciates work-life balance. Hello, hallelujah, amen to that. Marcia writes, when looking back, you feel good about where you are. Sophia writes, success is being financially affluent from a job that I am not busting my ass for, a career where I can take care of myself and family with no struggle. Colleen writes, success is working somewhere that my talent and skills are respected and appreciated. And I've got another private message here. Oh, sorry, this is another response that I will flag a little later, but I'd love for you to, Diana, for you to comment on those definitions of success. So thank you everyone also for sharing that. I love that.
I do love that. And I think from some of the millennials that we've been talking to, they really define success differently. And I think you heard that, I think at least 3 people talked about work-life balance. And again, that can change. When I was in my young 20s, I worked, again, in corporate finance on Saturdays. I was working 6 days in a row. That is not my life right now. So find the balance, whatever that is for you. But it's as long as you know what you want. And if you want to work really hard hours because you have certain aspirations, that's okay too. I just think it's all about your own personal definition of success. So knowing it, the self-awareness is really important.
Absolutely. And then I've got a private message here. What is your take on asking the person you are interviewing, that you're interviewing with, for the ability to speak with other people you might work with if the selection committee is small or limited?
Oh, yeah. Actually, I had one of my old bosses did that and I was blown away. This had never happened to me before. We're having the interview over lunch, like we'd already had a couple of meetings, and he writes down on a business card the name of 2 different managers that worked for him at the last place he was. And I was blown away. I just thought that had so much self-awareness. And it really spoke to who he was. And then I used that too when I was hiring someone. I'm like, well, you should go talk to these people. So I think it's also a good test to see how transparent that company is and how open they are to that type of collegiality. I don't think there's anything wrong with asking other people. And you might want to be strategic about it. You might want to say, I've talked to a lot of people in this department. I would just love to hear from this other side. Or I would love to hear from one other person who's just been hired, and to see what their experience has been like. I don't think there's anything wrong with that at all.
I love that. Transparency, for me, that's one of the key words of 2020, and like amplifying transparency in 2021. So bring it on.
Good.
All right, so let's move on to this next question here. Again, if this is your question or if this is not your question, we'd love to hear from you. So feel free to chime in. How can we keep a positive attitude if what we've accomplished doesn't match our previous demands?
I saw this question and I'm trying to think if when she means previous demands, does that mean it doesn't live up to her expectations of what she had hoped to accomplish or her new job? So it could be, we're going to talk about the transitional job. I think the one thing I would say is no matter what it is, if you're talking about your job search or that new job, find the wins. Find the small wins. A job search is a process. Remember, it's mile by mile. So maybe you got a few new responses to your resume. Maybe you have a great conversation and maybe you didn't get that job, but you learned so much more about the interview process. I think you just have to keep acknowledging yourself for the work that you are doing and the learning, because hopefully after 3 months, your interview process is a lot smoother. Your interview responses come a lot easier than they did when you first began the process.
And I'd also love to hear from our live callers. Let us know where you are in your journey, so that as we continue to dive into some of these questions, we can really speak to where you are in your journey. Are you just starting? Have you been looking for a year? Have you been looking for 2 weeks? Where are you in your journey of job searching? Are you career pivoting? Be as detailed as you want, and I'll flag that to our guest speaker today.
Yeah,
In the meantime, I'd love for you to hear, I'd love for you to speak about this slide as well before we roll into the next round of questions.
yeah, so this is how I talked about what you're doing makes such a difference. I had someone once ask me, how many resumes should I send out a week? And I really thought about that question. And I don't know that it's a numbers game, because if you send out 50 resumes a week, and then by the end of the month, you've sent out 200 resumes, but they were just sent out and they weren't real strategic, you're going to be even more discouraged because you said, look, I sent out 200 resumes. How did I not get a response? You want to be as proactive as you can. So you want to spend more than half of your time really driving the process. You want to find the companies, the jobs that you want to go after, less time responding to the job boards. Doesn't mean that you shouldn't go on Indeed, LinkedIn, all of them to try and find a job, but really try to switch it so that you're being more proactive about what you want. And sometimes if we're having a tough time really honing in on that, I live people with three things, and that's skills, interests, and market. Obviously focusing on your best skills, right? The things that you can do easily and that you can speak well about in your interview. And then your interests, hopefully these are the skills that you would enjoy doing, really hone in on the skills that you would enjoy doing and at the type of place you'd enjoy doing it. We all know the difference between like a small startup and a big corporate conglomerate. Where do you fit in those types of institutions? And market is one I did want to mention because everyone's really excited that we can work from home, and that's great. But there will come a time that a lot of companies are going to start bringing their employees back to campus. So you just want to make sure that even if you take a remote job, that geography of the headquarters of your new company does fit in with your life. Is it something that you would have to go into once a week, once a month, once a quarter? Do be thinking about down the road, because eventually some employees will be going back to campus. And then the other item that we wanted to talk about was financial cushion, because this also addresses, how long can I go before I have to take a job? And that was one of the questions that had come in. If you can do as much as you can, whether if you're unemployed now, or maybe you're thinking about finding a new job, right? You're looking, but you still have another job. Okay. So if you're unemployed now, you've got to think about where your finances are, but see how you can push that. Okay. So think about the two D's. You want to think about your dollars and your deadline, right? Let's say you say, I have to find a job by June 1st. Like that's it. My financial cushion runs out June 1st. What can you be doing in the meantime to extend that cushion? That way you aren't forced to take a job by June 1st that you're not crazy about. So can you do some part-time? Can you do some freelancing? Can you take a couple of contract gigs? You don't have to put them on your resume. It just helps keep you connected too, helps you keep connected to other people, helps bring in some money. That way the pressure is off. And then you can hold out a little bit more to try and find what we call the ideal job for you. We'll talk about it towards the end if we have to hit what I call the transitional job. But those are some things I think to be working toward, to give yourself a little financial cushion. That way you have just a little bit more flexibility is what I would say.
Beautiful. I love that big, beautiful word of flexibility. If only we could, be more interested in that. I think that we would take things with more ease and also more responsibility, right? Because we're flexible. We know where our genius zone is. We know how we thrive. We know, our deadlines and our dollars. I love that you broke it down to the two Ds as well. I'm going to flag some of the stages of journeys where our live callers are so that you can keep that in mind, Dana. We've got I told you that this hour is going to fly by. We've got about 20 minutes left. So I'm going to flag what folks have written in the chat box here, and then we'll move on to a couple more questions, keeping this in mind. So I've got a private message here, just starting second week of looking, career pivoting and trying to get from West Coast to East Coast. Rosie writes, graduated from software engineering boot camp a little over 3 months ago and searching for my first job in the field. Another private message, career pivoting from sales business development to a more technical sales operations role. Andrea writes, I've been job searching since August after being at the same company for almost 17 years. Leslie writes, 10 months of searching. Amy writes, I'm trying to career pivot and I've spent 2 months looking for a job in a new career field with new certifications. Julia writes, I was laid off in May 2020. I didn't start searching until August. A private message here, been looking for a few months, but have only been applying for 2 to 3 weeks. Marcia writes, laid off end of September, searching since October. Sherry writes, 7 months of searching and interviewing. Julia, and I'm stuck at the interview stage. I've had many pre-screens, a few second rounds, and not much more than that. Sophie writes, I arrived in New York from Australia 6 months before the pandemic hit and have been searching since. Being in a new city with no professional network has definitely added another layer to the challenge. Christy writes, 6 months of searching and interviewing. Sophia writes, I finished a boot camp in March 2020, applied for jobs on and off. Now my loan payments are $461 a month, sad face. Jen writes, after a brutal job hunt, took transitional jobs and have been coasting there. Recently dove back into searching for more fulfilling work. And then another private message here, the last one, 12 months of searching while distance learning for my children, updating professional certificates, and completing a data analytics programming bootcamp, which is a pivot for me. Diana, feel free to dive in here on these responses.
It has been an extraordinary year. And we actually have an episode for the Job Talk Weekly that drops tomorrow about how to address the pandemic in your job search. Many of these fine folks on the call have lost their jobs because of the pandemic. Maybe it was for other reasons, but somehow the pandemic is going to come up in conversation. So you want to find a strong place to come from, and just say, yeah, I got laid off in October. This is what I did. And then always pivot. So there's a couple questions about barriers and obstacles. In any of these conversations, try to just stick to the facts, hit that one item real quick. I lost my job, but now I've been really thinking, and here's where I want to go. Or whatever it was about the pandemic. The pandemic really taught me something different about myself. And now I know that this is what I want to do next. So don't dwell on it, but just try and get yourself moving forward. And it sounds like we do have a variety of people who are in their searches. So just start where you are, and eventually I do want to hit before the time's out, the idea of getting practical, because a couple of people had sent in that question I had seen over the past few days. Ideally you're doing as much networking as possible. You're staying positive, you're reaching out, but you might get to that point where it is time to take a job. So what I would hope that you do is sort of look at it in a different way. Try not to think of it that I'm stuck taking this job. Try not to say, oh, I've had to settle for a lower job. It's a different job. You're taking a transitional job. You are taking this job so that way you can get some money coming in. You got your daughter going off to college next year, and then you'll give it a shot. You will show up. You will be the best, awesome, whatever title it is that you have. You will meet new people. You will get out of the house, hopefully, out of your bedroom into a new Zoom class. And then by the holidays, again, if you've given it a year and there's no other opportunity for you, there's no recruiter who's going to fault you when you go around in December of 2021 and say, I took this job in February because of the pandemic. I mean, that says it all. And then you say, and I really tried and we looked for different opportunities, but there just wasn't growth for me there. Didn't turn out to be what I expected. So again, then you pivot to, now I know that I'm looking for something else. There's going to be so much turnover in the next year. We saw this after 9/11, quite frankly. There was an uptick in people moving jobs and starting their own businesses. So it's okay to take that transitional job. And I think of one of my favorite movies, Harry Met Sally, when he meets the transitional girlfriend, not supposed to be the one, and it might turn out to be a great job for you. Maybe it's a big enough company that you can get promoted or find another opening in the company. But really, it's about what you tell yourself. Then don't say that you settled. Just say, what, I'm going to take this just for now. This is my just for now job, my 2021 job, and then we can pick up once the economy starts to bounce back in whatever field you're in.
Great. So I had a private message here. What's a traditional job mean? I think you really hit the nail on the head. So for that person who wrote me privately, let me know if you want Diana to dive in more on that. But can you give us just a clear black and white definition on what a transitional job is for you to answer her question?
Yeah, I mean, it could be taking a job that maybe is a little bit lower level. Like, let's say you're a manager and you take a job as an analyst, or maybe you take a job in something entirely different, to do some freelance work on the websites like Upwork and Fiverr. Maybe you're a graphic designer, or maybe you're a creative and you were the head of a creative department, but agencies are really hit right now because the companies are hit. So you got laid off. Maybe you're just going to do some graphic design work just to keep yourself fresh, just to keep yourself in conversation with people. So I guess what I would say is a transitional job is something that is not your destination. It gets sort of buys you some time so you can figure out your next step and how you get there.
But it could lead to what you do.
But it could open up. It could open up. Yes,
exactly.
Absolutely. Yes.
Great. And then Chelsea, great. Yeah, you have to think of it, be open for the unexpected. And as long as you're, being true to yourself and, keeping that light there at the end of the tunnel, being fulfilled in what you're doing, I think that that's the most important thing. Chelsea, what is the name of the podcast again? So we'd love for you to talk about the podcast even a little more before we get to the last question here, so that we can make sure we support your podcast and listen in, and also follow you on socials.
Excellent. So the podcast is Job Talk Weekly, all three words. You can find us on the majors, Stitcher, Spotify, Apple, and we drop an episode every Wednesday. Tomorrow's episode is the pandemic in your job search. And next Wednesday, one of your favorite topics, emotional intelligence. I have a consultant talking about that there. And again, we bring on career experts, talent managers to really talk about the workplace. And we also interview people. So if any one of you wants to just go onto the website at jobtalkweekly.com, shoot me a note, we'll set up a time and we'll tape your conversation. And then your process will help other people. So Mariella, you could get on and say, I'm looking for a new job and I'm really struggling. And then we walk through the issues that you're having and how to fix them. And the goal then is that through your journey, other people can learn and apply those strategies to their own process.
Absolutely. Visibility is key. Remember, we started this chat like that. So share your journey, inspire others, and work through your shit as well.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, and I do want to mention on our blog, we have a lot of tips for networking during the pandemic, and just different strategies and tools to help people get started. Because that's another thing. I know sometimes it's just hard to do that one. It feels overwhelming. So just start where you are. Just start with one thing, and then hopefully the rest will start to fall into place.
Absolutely. So we've got a question here from Joanna. How is the pandemic affecting the hiring process? I'm asking this wondering how to manage my expectations of myself as this year has been extraordinary.
Yeah. And you know what, if I had the crystal ball to give you the most perfect answer, I would love to. But the part of it is that we don't know. And that's exactly what the recruiter, Steve, for tomorrow's episode said. He's like, this is such unknown territory for us. I mean, the obvious ones are that the companies that are hiring up are doing well and they are out there bringing on people. And then there's these companies, of course, hospitality has been hit really hard. They're practically shut down. And then there's a lot of different companies in between that we're not quite sure where they fit in. So it's really an unknown. And that's why it's important to try and find, again, friends of friends who work at some of these companies. That way they can give you the inside scoop. I know when this all happened, a lot of jobs were posted over the summer, but then, for instance, universities just put a freeze on them. But the jobs were still up. So people were still applying, but they didn't know that the jobs were frozen. And quite honestly, the universities didn't know what they were doing because they weren't sure who was going to show up on September 1st for class. So, sometimes the companies just don't know either. So it's a lot of uncertainty, which is, again, one of the other words of 2020. So again, just be real flexible and try not to take it too personally because, again, you don't know what's going on the other side.
Thank you for that response, Diana. I've got a high-level question here from Ursula. I've got some folks responding to her question. Would love to hear your take on it. So Ursula writes, mid-career, 1-page or 2-page resume. And we've got Julia that writes, my resume consultant said it was okay for 2, -2. Jen also writes -2. And I'd love to hear your response on that, Diana. Mid-career, 1-page or 2-page resume.
Okay, so let me put it the way I would say it. Anyone with 10 years or less of experience, 1 page. Anyone with over 10 years, you can definitely go to 2 pages.
Great, thank you for that. All right, so let's move on to this next question here. Again, if this is your question, we've got just a little under 10 minutes, so would love to hear from you all before we wrap up here. I need a job that values flexibility, that big, beautiful word that we talked about earlier. How can I bring this request to the conversation? What's the best way to share our demands?
Yeah. Well, it's actually really easy because you just ask the company how they've been dealing with the pandemic. How have they been dealing with people working from home? What's that been like? And then they can share with you how they have responded. Were they really strict, rotating people in and out? Or did they just say, you know what, work from home, let us know what you need and come on in. So ask them how they've been handling the last 9 months and you'll learn a lot. And that's like any interview process. It's one thing to ask, are you a flexible workplace? Yes. Okay, are you, how do you get that? So maybe you want to say, what's it been like during the pandemic? How have people been able to stay connected? How have you been able to communicate? How have you been able to keep morale going? Things like that. Those open-ended questions will give you a really big insight into the companies.
I love that. It's a two-way street, as you said. It's a partnership. So if you're going into looking for your mate, you wouldn't say like, do you like to be loved? How do you like to be loved? Like, everyone loves to be loved, but everyone likes love differently. So like, I love that you're like, get as specific as you can. Don't just ask for flexibility. Ask, how have you been handling, these certain situations that have happened? I love that you're asking to, dive in deeper there, and make sure you're looking out for yourself, essentially, right? So you're not getting into something that that you don't want to be into.
Yeah, and a lot of people also worry about, am I asking for too much? It's probably not the first question you ask. It's maybe in the second interview, or it's at the end of the interview. And then if you get the offer, there's nothing wrong with saying, I'm really excited about this. Because of my kid's situation, I'm still going to need to work from home, 2 days a week, 3 days a week. How does that work with you? And then you get to where you want to be.
Beautiful. And Jen writes, I think the key, I think a key to flexibility is that if you want it, you also need to be willing to offer it sometimes.
Yes.
I'd love for you to speak about this and also about boundaries, because this, I know that boundaries are also a big word, big topic, hot topic, especially in 2020. Do you have any tips and tricks on how we can strengthen our boundaries while also being flexible?
Yeah. So when it comes to the workplace, always make sure that you have a good understanding of what your company, your boss, whoever expects of you. And especially right now, we're doing a lot of, okay, can I get that to you by noon? When on Friday do you need it? There's a difference between 8 a.m. on Friday and Friday at 5 o'clock. Try to over deliver every once in a while. That way, when they know that you need to be off on Tuesday afternoon, that they can still count on you. So really clarifying deadlines and trying to over deliver as much as you can. And there are going to be times when we need to work late at night. There's a woman that comes to mind. She's a single mom. She got a 6-year-old at home, so, making it work whenever works for her. And that's why she asks those questions because she'll be working at night, Tuesday night. That way she knows she needs to get something Wednesday morning. She might not have time to do it Tuesday afternoon, but she knows she can do it Tuesday night. So clarity is key there.
Okay, so I've got a private message here, and I'd love to try to incorporate this question with the question that's on the screen. And it actually has to do with something that you've just mentioned as well. So everyone stay focused. All right, so a private question here. I'm a single mom who took a transitional job from June to December 2019 to be closer to family. Mm-hmm. It required an out-of-state geographic move. The hours and travel turned out to be much greater than I anticipated, which was not a good fit for my children, so we moved back home. I had a recruiter tell me I should remove the job from my resume or LinkedIn because it was only a 6 months duration. This would change my out of work time from 12 to 18 months. Do you agree I should remove it? So I'd love for you to tackle that question, and also move into this question on ageism. So how can we tackle ageism? Yeah. And also like these career breaks, we can say, yes. And not only a resume, but in an actual interview.
Yeah. I think you've got to take the advice and do what's right for you. If it is better for you to leave on there a 6-month job and say had to relocate due to family, I got nothing wrong with that. Who could fault you for that? And if a company isn't paying attention to you because you had to relocate for family, that's not the place that you want to work anyway. A lot of people did ask, Mariella, a lot of people asked about gaps on the resume. One gap on a resume, not a big deal. If you want, say, took gap year for family, Don't need to say whether or not you had a baby or not, just took gap year for family, took gap year to travel. In Australia, that is wholly expected, not only understandable. So it's okay to do that. And so if she doesn't like that 18-month break, then I would just go ahead and leave it on, especially if it's relevant too. And there's nothing wrong with explaining that. Someone asked before, do you need a resume and a cover letter? Recruiters read the cover letter if they like the resume. And so that's, you could explain your situation when you're on the phone with them. But again, don't dwell, mention, pivot, and move on. When it comes to ageism, boy, that is another, I'm talking fast because we got 3.5 minutes to go.
I know I threw this really hot topic your way in the last 5 minutes.
We did do an episode on Job Talk Weekly, Job Search at 50. And I brought on Gary Wexler, who wrote Boomer Rebellion. And he said, you know what, you got to own who you are. You don't want to change expectations. If you are 50 and you've got 30 years of work experience, don't slice and dice your resume to make it look like you've only got 10 years of experience, because you're devaluing what you have to offer. And they're eventually going to find out. They're going to come meet you one day and you're going to be on the Zoom with them and they're going to say, oh, okay. They're probably not going to say anything. We know that age is a protected class, but you've got to be somewhat in the range of who you are, and then really, really embrace the values and the experience that you bring to the table. And this is my favorite example. If you remember when Captain Sully landed the plane on the Hudson River 10 years ago, does anyone remember that in New York City? That man was almost 60. Give me a more mature, experienced pilot any day who would have the chutzpah and wherewithal to land a plane on the river versus a pilot with maybe only 3 or 4 years experience. There are plenty of jobs where the more experience, the better. So again, this is in your mindset. This goes actually back to the very, very first thing that we started talking about. Think about what you can control and what you have to offer. And it is a two-way street. You're going to want to find that company that values your experience and your maturity.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for tackling that really in-depth question. I know you can probably speak an hour or days about, this one question here about ageism on a resume and in the interview. But since we are running out of time, I'd love for you to leave us with some food for thought. What can someone start doing right now? When we end this chat, how can someone start to really dive into the job search, with the mindset that is going to keep them healthy and not, giving a part of themselves up that they wouldn't need to otherwise. So give us some food for thought, and then let us know how we can find you on socials and on the internet, so that we can listen to you and support the good work that you're doing.
Thank you. I think if I leave you with one tactical piece of advice, is that it's the networking, spending as much time as you can, building your network, asking who else should I talk to? Not is there anyone else but who else should I talk to? Make sure you're talking to people who are employed and unemployed, because each has different strengths that they want to bring to the game. And just remember, this is an extraordinary time. No one has been through this. This is beyond the global financial crisis of 10 years ago. So when you get yourself stuck, take a minute and say, okay, what can I do to get out of this? Call a friend, listen to a podcast, go for a walk, do something to get yourself out of that space, but be proactive. And if you remember from Physics 101, an object in motion stays in motion. Do one thing, and then keep doing it from there. And then the more you feel better on the inside, then the more you'll project that confidence when you do go for those interviews.
Beautiful. And we've got 1 more minute left. So what's one of your favorite episodes of your podcast that, if no one has listened to your podcast yet, go to this one, listen to it. And of course, we'll keep in tune with the rest that you've got scheduled for the year.
Well, I like the visualization one that I did in December. The job search at 50 was a great one. We have basic strategies, and we have the one coming out in emotional intelligence in a week from now. Those are the ones that are top of mind.
I know it's hard to choose one. I'm definitely going to hop over and listen to some of your work. Thank you so much for sharing all these tips, tricks, gems that you've dropped throughout the hour. Thank you everyone for participating in the chat box. Good luck to everyone. Let's really start this year on a high note. I think that it's a trickle effect, right? If we start with ourselves and we really focus on emotional intelligence and balance, work-life balance, all those things will trickle out, and we can, help shape at least our personal lives and hopefully the rest of the world. So Diana, thank you so much for spending time with us. And thank you everyone for joining us in this next hour. We'll see you on the next Chat and Learn. Bye.
My pleasure. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Mary.